March 2011. US forces invade Libya to eliminate Gaddafi.
Our military mission in Libya is clear and focused. Along with our allies and partners, we're enforcing the mandate of the United Nations Security Council. We're protecting the Libyan people from Gaddafi's forces.
There is no question we are at war once again, and this first phase is to take out Gaddafi's air defenses.
I have nothing but my gun, and I will fight to the last drop of my blood, and with the Libyan people behind me. Get out of your homes and attack the rats in their dens.
It was in 2010 in Tunisia when the Arab Spring caused a massive campaign of local people against the oppressive rulers. The Arab population had enough of unemployment, poverty, corruption, repression, and lack of transparency. As Tunisia was the first country to fall to the Arab Spring, Yemen, Syria, Egypt, and finally Libya were next. Gaddafi was ruling since 1969, and he did not tolerate any oppositions. People who criticized him were either put in jail or even got killed. He was known for corruption and was alleged to build an elite just for his family. Despite Libya's rich oil reserves, a significant part of the population did not profit from it. This was a major influence for the aggression towards him. There was anger towards Gaddafi because he ruled alone and did not invent democracy. No democracy, no free elections, and no free political system. But one major part was terrorism. Libya was alleged to organize terrorist attacks across the world. The most known attack was the Lockerbie attack. This act of terrorism occurred in December 1988 in Scotland. An American airplane was hit by an inside bomb. All 259 passengers died, and including 11 people on the ground. But why was Gaddafi alleged to do this? After investigations, the trace was leading to 2 Libyan spies who were found guilty in court in 2001. This attack was probably a revenge for the accident from the US Marine who shot down an Iranian airplane in 1988. After Gaddafi said that he did not initiate the Lockerbie attack,
so you could look the world in the face and say quite honestly that you did not order the Lockerbie attack.
Sanctions were imposed and the local population was upset about it. In 2003, the Libyan government agreed to pay compensation money to the families of the victims. This strategy allowed Libya to shut down the sanctions and to normalize ties with the West. But is it true that the Libyan population lived good under Gaddafi? I heard this many times, but let's check the facts. Libya has great oil reserves, and as I mentioned, the population did not benefit from it as it hoped. But comparing to other African countries, the GDP was high, the life was affordable, and people were profiting from state subsidies. Healthcare was free and well developed, education was free and it was improving. Women had access to education and gender equality was being promoted. The crime rate was very low. But due to sanctions and allegations against Gaddafi regarding terrorism, people started to revolt and to be unsatisfied. Gaddafi had the intention to unite Africa and to form a currency to be independent from the West. He saw many problems in the West regarding money. After he got sanctioned, he was getting suspicious and started to form an African coalition. He had a big problem regarding the Security Council. Gaddafi hated the idea that the world is dependent on 5 powers. He even stated that the African Union should join the Security Council and asked people if the other countries are not worth enough to be part of this council. In his famous speech to the United Nations, he explained himself.
How can we be happy about global peace and security if the whole world is controlled by only 5 countries? We joined the United Nations because we thought we were equals, only to find that one country can object to all the decisions we make. Who gave the permanent members their status in the Security Council? 4 of them granted this status to themselves. The only country that we in this assembly elected to a permanent member status in the Security Council is China. This was done democratically. But the other seats were imposed upon us in an undemocratically through a dictatorial procedure carried out against our will, and we should not accept it.
These words had a big influence on the countries that are dominated by the world powers, and Gaddafi became popular through this speech. He was like an underdog who opposed the 5 world powers and fought for equality. People perceived him as a liberator, especially the African people. After years of poverty, slavery, and robbery, the African states had enough and wanted autonomy. By these actions, he was a big problem for the West, because the West, especially states like France, are exploiting territories in West Africa, and maybe this is the reason why France also bombed Libya in 2011. If Gaddafi had succeeded to establish a currency which Africa would use for its economy, France would have lost its leverage of the CFA currency. This foreign French currency does not benefit the African people, it rather destroys their economy. But there is one problem everyone avoids. Libya was like a wall for Europe, because it was keeping Europe safe for the migration crisis which would come later. Gaddafi kept the borders closed and safe. After his death, things were getting out of control, and refugees found easy ways to get to Europe. Gaddafi had agreements with European countries, like Italy, to limit the number of migrants leaving Libyan shores. In 2008, Italy and Libya signed a treaty in which Libya agreed to take back migrants intercepted at sea in exchange for financial aid and investments. So Europe did not benefit from his death and the fall of his regime, but there is one country which certainly did benefit from his fall: the United States of America. After he called Obama his son at the United Nations meeting, he did not know what he would do to him later.
We Africans are happy and proud indeed. The son of Africa is now President of the United States of America. That is a historic event. Now, in a country where blacks once could not mingle with whites in cafes or restaurants or sit next to them on a bus, the American people have elected as their president a young black man, Mr. Obama, of Kenyan heritage. That is a wonderful thing, and we are proud. It marks the beginning of a change. However, as far as I am concerned, Obama is a temporary relief for the next 4 or 8 years. I am afraid that we may then go back to square one. No one can guarantee how America will be governed after Obama.
As you saw, he liked him and did admire him, but he did not know that Obama will be the one who will destroy his country. The excuse to invade Libya was the protection of the civilian population regarding the Arab Spring. Gaddafi's forces tried to suppress the uprising and to reduce influence from the West. Obama and NATO enforced a no-fly zone over Libya to prevent attacks on the civilians. As we all know, just like in Iraq, oil and other resources are very attractive, and the fact that Gaddafi tried to unify Africa was very dangerous for Western politics. In his 2-hour speech at the United Nations meeting, he collected many enemies who have big influence. He talked against the Security Council and discussed historical matters like the murder of Kennedy and pandemics. He also talked about colonization and why people are going to Europe for a better life.
Why are Africans going to Europe? Why are the Asians going to Europe? Why are Latin Americans going to Europe? It is because Europe colonized those peoples and stole the material and human resources of Africa, Asia and Latin America, the oil, the minerals, the uranium, the gold, the diamonds, the fruit, the vegetables, the livestock and the people, and used them. Now new generations of Asians, Latin Americans and Africans are seeking to reclaim that stolen wealth, as they have the right to do so.
He was the only one to talk so openly about these matters, and many comments mentioned that this speech was possibly the reason why he was killed. The first impression that people had was that he was crazy and that he was just criticizing the West for everything, but he certainly had some good points like colonization, the Security Council, and past military operations. In 2011, his last year began. Obama announces a no-fly zone, and NATO begins to strike Libya to end the suppression of the population. The man he admired and even named Africa's son was now the one to attack him. The Arab League and the African Union did not help Gaddafi. Gaddafi had significant military resources at his disposal, including a well-equipped army and air force, though much of his equipment was outdated. He had a core group of loyalist forces, including elite units and mercenaries, who were highly motivated and better trained than the opposition. Initially, Gaddafi retained control over Tripoli and other key regions, which allowed him to maintain the government control. But many of Gaddafi's own officials, military officers and diplomats defected to the opposition or fled the country, weakening his control. The opposition was widespread and deeply rooted in significant parts of the country, especially in the east. Cities like Benghazi became strongholds of the rebellion. The NATO intervention was decisive. The imposition of a no-fly zone and continuous airstrikes significantly degraded Gaddafi's military capabilities and provided crucial support to the rebel forces. The conflict involved significant asymmetric warfare, with Gaddafi's conventional forces facing irregular rebel groups. The rebels, though initially disorganized, grew more effective over time, especially with NATO's logistical and intelligence support. Key victories by the rebels, supported by NATO air power, shifted the momentum decisively against Gaddafi. The fall of Tripoli in August 2011 was a turning point. But this intervention did not succeed without casualties. What I criticize is that civilians were killed and no one faced justice in court. For over 4 decades, Muammar Gaddafi ruled Libya with an iron fist. His brutality became a symbol of his dictatorship, but in the spring of 2011, the tides began to turn. Inspired by the Arab Spring, the Libyan people rose up against their dictator, demanding freedom and change. What followed was months of brutal civil war. Cornered in his hometown of Sirte, Gaddafi made a desperate attempt to flee. NATO forces bombed his convoy, leaving him and his loyalists stranded. Dragged from his hiding place, Gaddafi's final moments were brutal. The once feared leader was at the mercy of the people he had oppressed. His death marked the end of an era, but it also plunged Libya into a turmoil. The country he once ruled with an iron fist was now left to rebuild from the ashes. After years of watching the situation in Libya, we see that the country was better ruled in Gaddafi's times. The African Union did regret their passive stance, and even Obama stated that he made a mistake.
What he considers his worst mistake as president?
Probably failing to plan for the day after what I think was the right thing to do in intervening in Libya.
President's referring there to the capture of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Although President Obama says he thinks the intervention went as well as it could have, he views Libya today as a mess.
Yes, Gaddafi was oppressive and did not tolerate anything against him, but was it the right way to get rid of him? Countries like the USA, China, Russia are also putting people in jail. People like Snowden and Assange showed us the brutal nature of the most dominant world power. And this is the exact problem what Gaddafi told us at the Security Council. The world is ruled by 5 powers, and anyone who opposes them is at the mercy of their aggression. It's easy to attack countries and to say that it was a mistake. This intervention destroyed Libya. This country did not prosper since 2011. Nelson Mandela talked about him and recognized a very important thing for the African people.
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies.
What Mandela explained here is that every enemy of the USA does not mean that this enemy is the enemy of the African people. Iraq and Libya showed us how a once strong and stable country can turn into pieces when a world power is turning against them. This should be a lesson why the world should be bigger than 5 powers. When Gaddafi died, he said he would take Libya's greatness with him. He did.